This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, where researchers come to learn, innovate, and connect.
And so we're paying these BIPOC-led nonprofits, C3, C4s, to come in and learn these hard skills and soft skills to build up their fundraising and their development within their organization.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Kina Collins, Executive Director at the Democratizing Philanthropy Project. Hello, Kina. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Thanks for having me, Jen. I'm super excited to speak with you today.
And before we launch right into our topic of donor acquisition, I'm wondering if I could hear from you a little bit about your career and especially what brought you to be leading Democratizing Philanthropy.
First off, I'm so excited to be in the family of DPP. I'm their first executive director. We are still in that infancy stage at DPP and have had such great success. And so my background is I like to consider myself an organizer. Born and raised in the city of Chicago. I still live in the city of Chicago. And my wheelhouse has been around working with organizations, survivors, and violence interruption work around gun violence prevention in our country. And I stepped into that work because I, like many young people across the United States of America, witnessed gun violence up close and personal in my neighborhood growing up in the city of Chicago. And it changed the entire trajectory of my life. And so I had an interesting kind of evolution. I went from the survivor space into the public policy advocacy space around gun violence prevention, into becoming an executive director in Illinois in 2020 for One Aim Illinois, formerly called the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence, one of the oldest and largest gun violence prevention nonprofits in the state of Illinois. And so I had this very unique journey into the C-suite executive experience, not very typical of many executives that I had met in the nonprofit space, but definitely felt like I contributed a lot. And then I ran for Congress. I ran for Congress in the district that I was born and raised in the Illinois 7th Congressional District. And I ran against a 25-year sitting incumbent, a congressman who's been my representative since I was 5 years old. I am now 32. So he's been there for a while. But when I launched that primary bid in my district for Congress, I ended up becoming the most serious primary challenger that the representative had ever went up against. I had never held elected office before, but I ran in the primary. We raised $1.4 million in the process. Over 95% of that fundraising was small dollar individual donation. And then we ended up losing the primary by 7 points.
Oh,
right.
Goodness.
And so it was what would be considered one city ward or 4,300 votes. Right. So that's how close the race got. And so after not succeeding in the primary or losing the primary, I was obviously on the job hunt, and I was tapped by a recruiter for a DPP, Democratizing Philanthropy Project. And DPP was founded by Yada Pang, who is also one of the founders, and she's leading the Just Fund right now. And she's just a genius. I think Yada is one of the most compassionate, brilliant, innovative minds that we have, not just in philanthropy, but a very emerging kind of intersection we're seeing between tech, philanthropy, and diversity and inclusion in the space. And so I met Yada, had the interview, and I was like, even if I don't get this executive director position, I am going to help DPP flourish. And the reason why I thought and believed so deeply in the mission at DPP was because it's exactly what I did in my congressional run and what I was doing in my organizing work. The framework was very simple. We're organizing people, we're organizing money, we're organizing the narrative. And when you have people and organized money on your side, that's how the movement grows and moves forward. And so that's kind of how I got involved with DPP. And I'm in my 9th or 10th month of being the executive director. And I couldn't be more proud of the work that DPP has done over the last 2 years, raising over $2 million for BIPOC-led organizations, focused mainly and primarily on small dollar individual donations. So we're really excited over here.
It is amazing. And I definitely want to talk more about outcomes, but I'm a detail person, I'm a researcher, and I would love to dig into a little bit about the work. So we in the field of prospect research often talk about prospect identification. And that's because by the time you hire a researcher, which is expensive, you're working towards major gifts. So while we have the skill set, it's definitely not donor acquisition. It's not that direct response, broad-based community support. And the lay population are frequently confused about that. And as a consultant, I get people who call me up and they want me to help them find donors. And it's not what I do. Mostly you need to already have the donors, and it's a whole process. Can you share a little bit about how DPP is doing that for folks and why it is focusing on donor acquisition as opposed to all the other many things it could be?
That's a really great question. So, number one, I think that the thing that connects donors to organization is that big question, the why. Why did you start your organization? The how. How is this going to impact and change the space? And, the who. Who are we helping in the process, and who are we liberating? Quite honestly, when we talk about BIPOC-led organizations, these are organizations that traditionally have been iced out of the philanthropy world when it comes to funding. These are organizations that are often left on the back burner, or there are so many obstacles and barriers put into the forefront for them to obtain those major gifts and donations from philanthropy. And what I was so interested about DPP was because when I was hired onto DPP, we were coming off the heels of the racial reckoning that happened in 2020 with George Floyd. And we saw an influx of donors all across the country looking to support organizations that were BIPOC-led, that were servicing communities, that were doing racial justice work, social justice work, gender equity work. And we found organizations that were getting the influx of these donations. They didn't know necessarily how to handle it because either they didn't have a development team or they had never had this level of interest in donations, right? And so while they had the narrative around and were very passionate around why they were doing this work, there was a logistical side, a development side, a infrastructure piece that was missing to sustain those level of donors that are really important to the heart of these organizations. And I'll tell you why. So small dollar individual donors were far more important in some cases than philanthropy, is because when the racial reckoning happened in 2020, these organizations who were in BIPOC communities, they were using their funding, or they needed funding for things that philanthropy does not traditionally fund. So, for example, peaceful protesters who were being arrested and needed a bail fund, right? We saw in the uprisings rioting happening and grocery stores being shut down or pharmacies being shut down. And there was a ton of need for mutual aid. Well, you can't necessarily use grant funding for those things, right? And so that increase that they saw in small dollar individual donors gave them the flexibility to help their community in the ways that the collective needed them in that moment. And so what we do at DPP is we empower these BIPOC-led organizations to build their own independent streams of revenue. And we do that through cohort-based learning. We have group virtual workshops, asynchronistic learning, one-on-one coaching that we offer. lead generation in organic fundraising and capacity building grants. And so we're paying these BIPOC-led nonprofits, C3, C4s, to come in and learn these hard skills and soft skills to build up their fundraising and their development within their organization. DPP is offering something that no one in the space right now is offering. And like I said, this really was the brainchild of Yada Pang. She put the super team of folks together who really believed, she just had a hunch that this is what BIPOC-led groups needed, that independent stream of revenue. And then she was right. And those first 2 years, once again, of putting these cohorts and these groups together, they raised over $2 million in small dollar individual donations. We're still seeing the return on investment on that.
So you hit on such a key item that I hadn't thought about. Anytime there's a small company, a small nonprofit, that bridge to growth is not funded. Those unrestricted dollars come from people. They don't come from grants, typically. Being able to get some capacity building funding to learn what you need to do to keep receiving and to grow those unrestricted dollars, that's brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it just gives them the flexibility to even invest in other things outside of just building a development team, right? They may need to use that stream of revenue to bring on a content creator, right? We know social media is really big right now, and that's how people are getting their news and consuming their news. We want to remove as many barriers as possible for them to flourish, for them to grow, and for them to build power in their communities. And I feel, just from being an organizer to literally running nonprofits, before I came on to DPP, the space is very white-centered and white-dominated. And that is not the culture that many of these organizations have come from. And they view it very differently on how we build community and how we build power. And they need to be funded in the process of that. And so DPP is not just a place where they're doing one-on-one coaching or they're just doing these virtual workshops. Vivian Chang, who serves on our board, who also runs the Sandler Fund, she spoke so eloquently about it. DPP is creating a political home for these organizations to come to learn from one another and to build up their financial and their infrastructure power in the space.
Well, that's powerful. And how do nonprofit organizations find DPP? How do they learn about you and access what you're offering?
Yeah. So we're not taking applications right now, but the place that people could watch out for when those applications are open is democratizingphilanthropy.org. They can reach out to us that way. They can also email us. So all of that information is on our website, and then they can find us also on social media, which is linked to the website as well.
Before I let you go, I'm wondering if you have resources or advice for organizations about how they could learn more about your work and about stewarding a broad base of donor support effectively.
Absolutely. If you go to our website, democratizingphilanthropy.org, we have a tab on there about how we work. We talk about cohort-based learning. We talk about the different programs that we offer. What is lead generation, right? Like, how are we utilizing digital organizing to increase funding for these organizations? And we have our Power Progress Summary Impact Report on our website. So please plug in if you like what you see and you want to reach out, or you just want to build community with us. Please feel free to hit the contact button on our website, and we'll get you connected where we can.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing today. I'm so glad that we were able to connect, and I really enjoyed learning more about you and Democratizing Philanthropy Project.
Thank you so much.
That was Kina Collins, Executive Director at the Democratizing Philanthropy Project. If you're one of those prospect researchers like me that keeps dreaming of ways to leverage research skills to have a meaningful impact on growing nonprofits, Kina just gave us a lot more to think about. DPP doesn't dump training or information and expect impact. They provide funding, cohort-based training, and other resources and support. And it works. Their Power Progress report touts impacts such as participating organizations seeing a 50% increase in small donor revenue year over year. Read more by visiting www.democratizingphilanthropy.org/power-progress.